Welcome to video number 2 of the Daniel 70th 7 core series. In the first video, we covered the scripture in depth, Daniel 9 and 12, the relevant sections for the 70th 7. In this video, we're going to cover the 69 in depth, and then in the third video, we'll cover the 70th in depth. If you're looking for the short intro or overview, there is a short video that just focuses on the 69 and the 70th. And just gives the punchline. Here, these 3 core videos, we're doing an in-depth analysis and comparing some alternatives and really justifying the interpretation thoroughly. So these are the in-depth videos. With that, let's dive in. So we're back at Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. And we see again that from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One comes, there will be this the 69 sevens. So the start is the specific decree that goes out. The end is when the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, which is Messiah. And excuse me. That start and end covers a time of a period of 69 sevens. As we discussed in the first video, the term 7 is a vague unit of 7. Okay, it doesn't tell us what that, what is the unit, 7 what? We don't know, 7 what's. So contextually here, one thing that can come to mind is a sabbatical year, which is a 7-year block. There's also the very fundamental translation or meaning that could be a week. So the old English translations actually use the term English word week because it can mean a week. So in terms of what the options are, it's not even like the only thing that we could think of is the 7-year block, that we could think of 7 days. It could be any other 7 months, 7 years. The text just doesn't say. We take 7 years because if we check 7 weeks, 7 months, different other options, it's not going to land anywhere. Again, if you look back at the other video or the Daniel document that lays all this out, we established that there is a start and an end. The start needs to be the decree, and the end point needs to be the arrival of Messiah. So clearly, you can sort of off the top see why people decided 7 years was a good option, and that's what we're going to crunch here. I'm not going to show exhaustively all the other options because, again, Messiah didn't arrive 7 weeks or 7 months after any of the date options that you'll see, the candidate dates for the decree period, the decree date. So we take 7 years and we say, okay, 69 of those times 7 is 483 years. In the ancient Near East, both Jewish calendars and Babylonian calendars used a 360-day year. So we get 173,880 days when we do that math. Why are we using 360? I want to point out that this is not a prophetic year. Okay, some of the literature covering these topics, people use the term prophetic year. Other people get frustrated and say there's no such thing as a prophetic year, so stop making that up. What we're going to say is that we're not calling it a prophetic year because I agree that there's no such thing in the Bible. However, the 360-day calendar is the standard ancient Near East convention of 12 months and 30 days in each month. Not only that, but there's biblical basis for this as well, which is why I don't quite understand why there's even an argument about it. I think it's because of the dates and people wanting certain dates to align to meet certain opinions or conclusions that they want to draw, and it doesn't work if the math doesn't work out that way. We'll get to that in a minute. I won't just vaguely state that. I'll give you a specific example. But in Genesis, we see 150 days, and it's called 5 months, and it lists both of those explicitly. You can go look that up. So that certainly implies 30 days per month if you're going to have 5 of them and have 150 days. It's also mentioned in Revelation, which we'll cover in our Revelation document and the Revelation videos more in depth because those timestamps are Daniel's timestamps. But Revelation itself, just taken at face value, mentions time periods that do appear in the text to be the same. This isn't proof, but this is just another line of evidence that if 42 months is going to correspond to 1,260 days, that only works when it's 30 days per month. So those two numbers being related certainly further seems to imply. So both Genesis and Revelation, as well as external evidence from just calendars of the Near East location during that time period, is that Daniel's readers would compute 360-day units. That's what a year was back then. So that's why we're using 360 days. It's not a it's not a special prophetic calendar. It's not some kind of magical year that Daniel uses that we have to somehow know about. He doesn't state that, so it's not stated in the book, in the scriptural passages, but we can infer it again from these other biblical locations as well as external sources. So we use it 360 days for the year. So that gives us the number of days, but where do we start counting from, right? So we need to figure that out. We, in the previous video, talked about, or in the short video, talked about what that date is. We just gave the date that we use, but here we're going to do the deep dive into the 4 primary candidates for that period. For that date. And the first one is Cyrus put out a decree in 538 BC, and it said, "Let the house of God be rebuilt." That was referring to the temple in Jerusalem. You can read about this in Ezra chapter 1 if you want to read the full backstory. The issue with this decree, though, is that it really was specific to the rebuilding of the temple and not the city. But the passage in Daniel, if you recall, it's talking about rebuilding the city, the streets, and so forth. So also, if we check the math, which is, again, we're checking the math here, so we've got a certain number of days, and we can see, does it have any meaning, right? Is it gonna make sense of anything? We know the start is the decree, so if we say, okay, let's assume this is the decree, how would we check it? We would just add those number of days that the 69/7 covers, and we see where it lands. What's it supposed to land on? Well, it's supposed to land on something that has to do with the arrival of the anointed one, the ruler, from Daniel chapter 9. So that's what we're looking for. We don't know exactly where to start it, but we know if we start it in the right place and we do our math correctly, we're going to land at something that is significant with respect to Jesus and his arrival. We can imagine that could be a few different things off the top of our heads without knowing a whole lot. Again, this concept of sophomore Bible student, like what do we know of that it could be representing the arrival of Messiah? Certainly his birth would be one, so the incarnation would potentially qualify. His stepping into public ministry, the public baptism, those could be 1 or 2 different events. Those would sort of make sense. The crucifixion is certainly key. As we've said, Daniel is very focused on that, so it doesn't seem like an arrival, but we could throw it out there as a key date. And then the resurrection, certainly significant day, sort of arriving back from the dead. Maybe it's the resurrection. The ascension probably doesn't make sense. That's more of a departure than an arrival. So probably not that one. But we could say the first 4 could be, candidates. We'd be looking for something along those lines. Well, in the case of the 538 BC decree, we land around 55 BC. And certainly nothing related to Jesus happens during 55 BC. So that's not a good choice. The next candidate is Darius in 520 BC, issued a decree that said, "Let the work on this house of God alone." So it was kind of so Ezra 6 covers that. It was basically a reaffirmation of Cyrus. So it sort of is not its own new standalone decree, but still it's a decree. But again, because it reaffirms Cyrus, it's really focused on still being the temple and rebuilding specifically the temple. But Daniel, remember, gives a few specific phrases about the rebuilding of the city and the streets and a trench during times of trouble. So that doesn't seem promising. If we crunch the numbers, also 37 BC, also not promising. So again, this one gets rejected both on thematic and contextual for contextual reasons, as well as the math itself just doesn't land anywhere meaningful. And so we say, well, that certainly doesn't seem like a good fit. Option number 3 is Artaxerxes gave another decree in 458 BC. This decree was given specifically to Ezra to empower and authorize Ezra to go and continue the rebuilding And that decree said whatever is needed, but specifically it talked about the articles of worship, the judiciary, treasury, so funding, the temple services and things that were needed to get temple service back on track. So again, it's not really a construction commission. And again, if we crunch the dates, we get closer. We get to 26 AD. So that certainly seems like a closer to the time that could be considered the arrival of Jesus. It's not the incarnation. It seems early to be the public ministry, certainly not the crucifixion in 33 AD. So that also doesn't look like a good choice. At this point, I want to mention, do a little sidebar and sort of a hat tip to the Seventh-day Adventist camp. They are very strong proponents of a variant of this decree, which is in 457 BC. They adjust that date a little bit and say it's not really, didn't really happen in 458 BC. So there's some calendar nuances there that they point to justify 457 BC. They also reject the 360-day year. So they're one of the groups that sort of decries the 360 as a prophetic year. That's a fake concept. And so they use real solar years. So 365.24, blah, blah, whatever the decimal points are. So very precise, actual astronomical year as we understand it scientifically here in 2026. And when they do that math, that lands around 27 AD. So it goes a little bit later than the 26 AD because of those, 365 days instead of 360 punches it a little bit forward, as does starting in 457 BC instead of 458. And so it lands in 27 AD. And they will claim that that is the public launch of Jesus into public ministry. And that but the wrinkle there is that it requires 30 AD for the crucifixion, and that is not very well supported. Obviously, they will disagree with me, but it's really not. The 33 AD is really what the well-supported crucifixion date for Jesus. It can't be just any year, so there's some nice constraints on that astronomically and calendarically. Jesus died on a Passover that was on a Friday. Passover is not always on Friday, and so the most recent prior Passover on a Friday is the 30 AD option. So they go to that one because they have to, because there's not anything sooner than 33 AD with a Friday Passover except for 30 AD. So they pick that. What I love about it and why I sort of say this is a hat tip to that crew is I like that they keep the crucifixion as the midpoint. So the arrival of Messiah is in 27 AD. And then they have 30 AD as the crucifixion, so that the crucifixion is the center of their 70th seven. They will say the 70th seven is a 7-year block, like we're about to prove that the 69 is. And so they have 27 AD, midpoint is 30 AD, and the end point would be 33 AD. Here's where I think it breaks down. Already they had the issues of the crucifixion is not very well supported to have happened in 30 AD. But furthermore, the 1290 and the 1335, I say, are dangling. I think they have maybe I think they turn it into years and have it go well into the modern era for something. I consider that sort of a yellow flag whenever you see in eschatology some numbers giving significance to our own time or recent times. Somebody significant in our stream of denomination or whatever. We all want our time to be significant cosmically, and covenantally, but the reality is most of our time is not, and that's okay. It doesn't mean we're insignificant. It just means we don't live in a significant time. But I find that's a real pressure in these arenas that makes people lean toward interpretations that favor their time as being significant, even if they're not. Again, it's not the people that aren't significant, it's our time. 2026 isn't a significant year, I would argue, on God's cosmological calendar or the covenantal calendar. We're in the middle of a very broad period. We'll cover that later in Revelation. So I think that the 1290 and the 1335 need to be right there where the 70th would put them, assuming all the times are sort of the same for the 70th. And what that means is in 33 AD, where they say is not the crucifixion, so there's nothing happening 3 years after the crucifixion that can be for the 1260 or the 1290 or the 1335. So lots of reasons why I think that doesn't work, but I appreciate their appreciation for the crucifixion being a prominent piece in Daniel. That is the prominent piece, is the piece, and so they keep that as the center of their 70th, which I think is awesome, because I think it should be, and it is, but not in 30 AD. Okay, final candidate then is Artaxerxes, the fourth and final candidate decree that is at all relevant to Jerusalem and rebuilding anything or reinstituting anything after the Babylonian desolation and exile, is Artaxerxes. And he gave the decree to Nehemiah. People are probably familiar with this one. Nehemiah chapter 2, if you want to go, actually, we're going to read it in a second on the next slide. And in 444 BC, he gave him a command, or authorized him to go and rebuild it. Nehemiah said, send me to my home city and country so I can rebuild the city. So it explicitly says rebuild the city. That's the point of the thing, the decree. So it very much matches to the restore and rebuild Jerusalem that Daniel says. The decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem certainly fits. It also says it will be done in times of trouble. Which it certainly was. Everybody knows those stories. Nehemiah and the guys from the neighboring nations that harassed them during the building, that sort of made it difficult for them. They had to push through that. So the fact that Daniel says it would be rebuilt during times of trouble certainly fits that narrative as well. And so if we pick that decree, then the endpoint we arrive at is none other than Nisan 10 in 33 AD, which just so happens to be Lamb Selection Day. Visiting the Nehemiah passage briefly, Nehemiah chapter 2, it says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. So the month is specified, the year is also specified, and we know with pretty good degree of historical accuracy that was in 444 BC. The day is Nisan 1. This is a convention, so this might be strange to people, but they didn't list the date that the decree went out, but what was common during that time was that decrees were released on the first day of the month. So that's a normal thing. Plenty of other decrees were listed on the first day of the month as being the day that they sort of announced, here's the latest decrees of King whomever, and they would read those out on the first day of the month. So that is somewhat of an assumption, but there's really no better assumption, I think, that I've seen that anyone has. I think everybody assumes that. The debate is about, well, when did Nisan 1 occur, or which decree is it? But the idea that it came out on the first of the month seems pretty widely agreed upon. No real alternative to pick a more specific day, and good reasons to pick the first day of the month. Again, it rebuilds the city, which matches Daniel's language, so that's a fit with Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, which we covered. So, okay, we can do the math, but it's not simple subtraction. Why is it not simple subtraction from this day to that day? So let's cover some of those details. First off, there's no year zero. Okay, so 1 BC goes right into 1 AD. So if you do simple numerical math, 5 AD minus whatever 15 BC, you have to account for that. 360-day years, we mentioned, is counting, but that's just for the purpose of counting the days. Again, we're not talking about a prophetic year. There's nothing funky or special. The issue, or sort of a conversion, is really just, they say 360-day years. Let's count how many years are being talked about, and then let's do the math as if those are real solar days. Okay, so there's no sort of special prophetic calendar in use. It's real days. The question is just when Daniel said a year, or the angel told Daniel a year. He didn't tell him a year, but what's being told, if it was a basis of a year, we know that they would know that Daniel would interpret that and understand that to mean 360 days. And so we do the math on those numbers as if 360-day years are what's being talked about, because that's what they would be talking about. And then we just treat those as regular days. And then we can do the math on the calendar and see exactly where they land. One of the other complications is that Jewish months don't start exactly the last day plus one. It's lunar driven, and so it starts at the first visible crescent, which can vary a little bit. Fortunately, so plus or minus 1 day of uncertainty for the first day of any month. Okay, that's because if it's cloudy, they couldn't quite see it or whatever. There's a little bit of fuzzy window there. The nice thing is, though, we have in modern times astronomical precision to rewind the equations and see where was the moon at any given time. So we can actually get a high degree of confidence despite that plus or minus 1 day uncertainty. But where it will land is on the Jewish calendar. What they call a certain day still has that uncertainty baked in. 30 days is the counting unit, but the actual months can alternate 29 or 30 because of that plus or minus 1 day of uncertainty. But the plus or minus 1 day only applies to the start and end dates, not every month in between. Okay, so what that means is it's not like we're having to say how many months are there. We have a plus or minus 1 day of uncertainty on each of those, and so we need to add all of those up, and the uncertainty accumulates. That's not how the math works. It's basically only applied to the end date that we're trying to calculate. Another wrinkle is intercalary months, which is a 13th month that gets added. But the good news is we know when those happened. There's only a little bit of uncertainty about whether they get added during times of war, where people sort of don't have the luxury of caring as much about the calendar. So that occurs every so many years, but again, pretty well documented when they did happen. And it's an extra month so that Passover stays in the spring, so it's an adjustment to the Jewish calendar. It shifts Nisan by a month relative to our calendar, which is Julian and Gregorian. So again, why is it not dozens of days off and just plus or minus 1? It's because we're not summing months. We're just picking 2 dates and then calculating the number of days in between. And so the only uncertainty is which Julian date that we're converting to for Nisan 1 on the Jewish calendar or the Babylonian calendar. All right, so let's run some numbers. The computation is from 444 BC, which is that fourth candidate for the decree, to 33 AD is going to be 476 solar years. So right now we're just computing rough math based on actual years, astronomical years. So if we do 476 and we do 365 with the precision, that's going to give us 173,855 days. But that's March 5th to March 5th. And so if we add 25 days to that, we come to the 173,880 days, which is the same thing that we get when we do 69 times 7 times 360 days. So sort of just checking the old ancient Near East calendar approach, but then also our, solar days, we expect them to be the same because, again, the one corrects for the other. And so it's exact to within plus or minus 1 day, again, because of that final, because of the month of on the Jewish calendar, is the first day of the month, what exact day does that correspond to on the Julian Gregorian calendar, could be off by up to plus or minus 1 day. Okay, so we do that math. It landed on Nisan 10. So what day is that? Well, turns out if we go to Exodus chapter 12, we will see that tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. So this is the day that the Passover lamb is selected. It is Lamb Selection Day. The lamb was kept for inspection until Nisan 14, so 4 days later, which was Passover, which was Slaughter Day, when the lambs were killed. So again, the context of Daniel is the arrival of Messiah. Certainly seems like a very compelling date for our math to land us precisely on Lamb Selection Day, which is 4 days prior to Passover. Incredible. So March 29th to 30th, 33 AD is when Jesus rides into Jerusalem. That day is Nisan 14. We're going to unpack the details of why we have March 29th to 30th in a minute. Zechariah passage is generally considered to be fulfilled when Jesus came in. Your king comes to you riding on a donkey, I think even a foal. I think it mentions a young donkey. So Jesus rode in exactly as multiple prophecies said he would ride in, the way and the time Daniel here is giving us a time frame, so he's fulfilling multiple prophecies when he rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Again, there's this idea of inspection period, which is fascinating too. I'm sure someone can unpack it more than I have here. But Jesus was there in Jerusalem being inspected leading up to Passover, right? That was the Passion Week. He's in Jerusalem. A lot of things are happening. I don't remember if there were healings. Probably there were. But certainly teaching is happening and conversations are being had, questions are being asked. And he's very much, you could view that time as being inspected. Is he really the Son of God? Is he really the Messiah? Is patterned after the inspection of the lamb, making sure that it is spotless, making sure that it isn't sick, nothing is wrong with it over those period of 4 days before it's actually sacrificed. So there's this inspection period that certainly is fulfilled during that time frame. And now a little wrinkle here, though, is Nisan 10 to Nisan 14. How many days is that? Because if we say, well, he came on Palm Sunday, and we count Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Oh, wait a minute. That's 5 days. So is it 4 days prior to Passover, or is it 5 days? So modern counting, we would have from the 10th to the 14th. Is that 4 days later or 5 days later? But we have to remember Jewish days run sunset to sunset. Okay. And so what's happening is that on Nisan 14, which is the Friday, the crucifixion is well established to be that day, during the day. But counting backwards, we would go land on Nisan 10, which would be 4 days. But Nisan 10 would be Sunday evening to Monday evening, because again, the sunset to sunset timing of or counting of Jewish days. And so Nisan 10 would start on Sunday at sundown. So Sunday evening would be the beginning of Nisan 10, which is the day, which is Lamb Selection Day. So Jesus enters at the threshold of Nisan 10 as Nisan 10 is starting if he comes late in the afternoon on Sunday. So that is how he arrives on Sunday, even though Nisan 10 is really Sunday evening to Monday. So Palm Sunday, we call it that. That's obviously a Christian term. That's not a Jewish term. And so it's a liturgical tradition. That's what we call it, that he arrived on Sunday, because in our, Julian Gregorian calendar world, it was Sunday, Sunday, late afternoon, early evening. But that early evening time frame on the Jewish calendar is Nisan 10. So when we say March 29th to 30th, it's actually not. You might have thought that we're accommodating for that uncertainty, and that's talked about in depth in the document. For those who want to go even more in depth than this video is going to go. But it's not. We're actually just addressing the sunset boundary, that actually Nisan 10 is March 29th, Sunday, to March 30th, Monday. So it's the evening of the 29th and the day of the 30th. Does that make sense? I hope so. So in the scripture, we read John chapter 12, Jesus arrives at Bethany, and it's stated that that's 6 days before Passover, so that would be Saturday. Further in John 12, it says the next day after that, he arrived there, is when the crowd came out to meet him, and then eventually the triumphal entry processional into Jerusalem. So that happened on Sunday. So the lamb arrives for inspection right on schedule. He arrives on Nisan 10, again with the clarification that Sunday, the end of Sunday, is the beginning of Nisan 10, and that's why it's 4 days before Passover, counted on the Jewish days. Again, so Passover would start on Thursday evening and go to Friday evening. So if we count that way, we're now looking at starting Sunday evening, Monday evening, Tuesday evening, Wednesday evening, Thursday evening when Passover starts. And that's 4 days on the Jewish calendar, but can look like 5 on ours if you're counting Sunday to Friday. The typological point holds regardless of the exact hour. Again, if someone has hourly information, that'd be awesome. So I would love to see that. I'm not saying there's not precision there. Just saying that with these prophecies, we only have precision to the day. I have not come across anything that indicates anybody knows exactly what time Jesus rode in anyway. I don't think the prophecies are that precise, but if they are, I'll be happy to see it. So maybe somebody can unpack that. But we're not saying anything here about there being any sort of hour level precision, which is why it certainly feels to me that Sunday afternoon, evening is fits the need for arrival, or fits the calendrical significance of an arrival on Lamb Selection Day, 4 days prior to Passover. So 4 days lands us on the crucifixion, April 3rd, 33 AD. Again, a very well-established date. Lots of scholarly support for that. It's actually even astronomically confirmed. So that Friday, Passover, again, Passover occurring on a Friday doesn't happen all that often. And so there's a lot of, and with the Jewish calendar being lunar-based, there's actually a lot of precision. There's a little bit of wiggle room because of the start date of the month. But there's not in this long time span sort of that we're having to look at. We actually can get still a fair amount of precision because of some of the astronomical considerations of when the moon was where in the sky. This is a claim. There's some people who disagree with it. I mentioned the Seventh-day Adventist group. But that's a minority view by far. There's really no serious alternative date. Again, no disrespect to those who would say, no, we have serious scholarship behind alternative dates. But again, there's astronomical constraints, there's calendar constraints, there's biblical internal evidence and statements about when Passover occurred, etc. So it's very well established, I would say, that crucifixion date. The decree date is one that's more up for grabs. But there's no real, I would say, strong discussion or debates about when the crucifixion occurred. All right, so coming to the end here, what have we established at this point? We have established that the 69 sevens go from the decree to when the Messiah arrives, and we crunched the math. We found 4 good choices for the decree date and decided that actually 3 of them were not good, and only 1 of them really checks the boxes for our criteria in the first place of the decree. But in any case, we can check the math on all 4, and it doesn't work for the other 3 in any meaningful way without some crazy, what I'm calling crazy, other requirements to prop it up. In the case of the 457 BC, where they've adjusted it from 458 to 457, and then they still have to have the crucifixion being in 30 AD, which is really not tenable, and it leaves the other numbers from Daniel in not places that make sense. And so, and again, I haven't proven that, but you'll see in the next video why I can say that with the 70th 7, once you see the dates that we're going to show here. It's compared to that, there's even though there may be claims about what the 1290 and 1335 represent, there's no real match there, certainly not the way you're going to see in the 70th 7 here. So with the 69, we go from that decree then and do the math, and it lands us very comfortably on Palm Sunday. We're not having to stretch, we're not having to reach, we're not having to squint one eye and tilt our head and go, yeah, maybe that's close enough to a surprising degree of accuracy. 173,880 days, and we land exactly on Lamb Selection Day. So not only Palm Sunday, but in the Jewish calendar, Lamb Selection Day, certainly significant. As we also said, well, not in this video, but in the short summary video, the decree date lands on, that happens to be on the Jewish calendar. Nisan 1 is the year for a new king. So a new era begins, a new era of a new king begins. So that's also significant on the Jewish calendar. So this red carpet here, which is why I colored it red, is showing that we are taking, or it's announcing a new king. The arrival of Messiah that's said to happen at the end of that 69 happens on Lamb Selection Day when Jesus rides into Jerusalem. So the 69 sure seems to check out and make a whole lot of sense in the context of Daniel's prophecy, right? The prophecy is in the 77s, these great things are going to happen. These key redemptive things are going to be completed or fulfilled. The Messiah will arrive. These things are explicitly stated there. And so we have the unveiling, the start of a new king's era. He arrives. The 69 by itself is really cool. Again, this is not new. This is not from me. I'm just reiterating. I meant to mention this at the beginning. the reason I'm doing this is not because it's new, but just so these videos are all self-contained. For some people, this may be new, they've never heard it, so I want them to be able to just go through these videos. But you can go search online. There's other YouTube videos. There's internet articles. So this has been well established. People crunch these numbers. I've also affirmed and confirmed these numbers with our own math and calendar tools. So I'm saying I agree with this math, not just I'm taking their word for it, but I've proven that these numbers work. Added my own calculation to that, and it seems to check out. So we're just one voice in a chorus of voices that promote this view, and the math's there to back it up. So that's not new, but that's really awesome. The 69 by themselves. What is the takeaway? The takeaway is, how did we decide? So we have now decided that the 69 sevens are blocks of 7 years. So the time unit is a year. When it says a 7, it means 7 years. But how did we get there? The text didn't tell us that. This is the other reason why I wanted to do this video, because other treatments of the 69 are not going to harp on this the way that I'm going to harp on it right now, which is, okay, yeah, cool. We arrive on Palm Sunday if we pick the right decree date. That's really awesome, and it is. But the takeaway is, how did we get there? Why do we think that it's 7-year periods? Because of this math. Because the dates line up. A meaningful Jewish date of New Year for Kings, all the way to Lamb Selection Day, which is, according to Daniel's text, the arrival of Messiah. So that checks out and makes sense. If we check 7 weeks, none of those things are, well, the decree could be there. But 7 weeks after, 69 chunks of 7 weeks after the decree, nothing. 7 months, same thing. When we plug in a year, boom, Palm Sunday jumps out at us, right? Oh, we know March 29th to 30th, 33 AD. That's Palm Sunday. Furthermore, it comes out on the Jewish calendar to be Lamb Selection Day. It's not just a random day, it's a holiday. It's a special day, a feast day. So that's compelling. And we go, oh, okay. Then now we know that the 69 sevens are blocks of 7 years. We know that because we ran the numbers, and they check out when we plug in that the time unit is a year, and it lands us on Palm Sunday, Lamb Selection Day. So the question then is, so what is the time unit of the 70th seven? And that is what the next video will cover.